Hi, this is Kevin Field. Radio Skills for Podcasters, the podcast, episode 2. It's all about the format.
Learn the secrets of the radio industry.
Create powerful podcasts.
Get,
keep,
and grow your audience.
and increase your profits.
This is Radio Skills for Podcasters
Radio Skills for Podcasters.
with Kevin Field.
With Kevin Field.
Enjoy the podcast.
Hello and welcome. This is Radio Skills for Podcasters. This podcast aim is to improve your game, or in fact, your podcast. I provide you with knowledge gained from working in the radio industry for over 20 years. That knowledge will enable you to get, keep, and grow your audience. In this episode, we look at the format of your podcast, what goes in, and what I think many podcasters are doing themselves a disservice by doing or not doing in their podcast. This week's top tip is a simple acronym that will help you achieve less clutter in your podcast. I always welcome feedback from you. You can follow at radio_skills on Twitter. Check out the Facebook page, Radio Skills for Podcasters, or email skills@radioskillsforpodcasters.com. We look at the format of your podcast in this episode. Part 1 of format is the skeleton, the thing you put together. Part 2 is what you say and how you say it.
This is Radio Skills for Podcasters.
Every radio show, TV program, book, magazine, newspaper, or podcast should have a format. Many do, some do not. Every successful format does. Fact. Every day, every week, every month, they are the same but different. That's the key to their format. The same but different. Just stop. Have a think about the programs that you really like most. Maybe the magazines you like most. Maybe the books and an author of a book that you like most. Each time it will be the same but different. The Bond movies, huge franchise, the same but different. X-Men, serial, every week, the same but different. This American Life, every week. You get my point. And each follows a format, and so should your podcast. So let's talk about the format for your podcast. If every single week your podcast is different, that things are in different places, a different order, it becomes out of place for your listener. If you're trying to grow QMA, that your listener will listen more often and for longer, then you really need to keep it together. The listener finds it hard to tune into a brand that's all over the place because there is no brand. The values are lost. People may listen to one or two, but they don't come back. They don't listen for long when they listen. We are creatures of habit, mostly. We get up at a similar time. We go to work at a similar time. We eat our breakfast. We have our dinner. All of that, similar patterns all the time. We hate change as human beings. We're habitual. Have you ever done this? On your journey to work, you see someone on a bike, or someone walking, or someone in a shop, and you always see them regularly at the same time every day. But on this day, they're a bit further advanced. They're ahead of where they normally are. Without looking at your clock, your watch, you know that you're probably later than normal. The number 59 bus has gone past at a different time. The bloke in the Ford Focus is way ahead of you, whereas before he's usually miles behind you. I was a producer of one of Capital Radio Group's flagship breakfast shows. We had complaints. You wouldn't believe this. We had complaints from listeners if we were late by just 2 minutes with a feature. It's because they set their clock by us. They're in the shower. We're doing the feature. They think, oh, it's fine. I've got lots of time. It's all right. I don't need to leave yet. I'm ahead of myself. But we're actually 5 minutes behind with the feature. That knocks their day out. Seriously, we had complaints. So every time with a breakfast show, we had to be on time every time. But how does that play for your podcast? Well, my advice is for you to create a format for your podcast if you haven't already. It lends uniform to your brand. I'm not saying you can't change it ever. You will change it, just as we do with anything else. If we split test things, if we test things for a podcast over a period of time, like we do with radio stations, we change things on the radio quite regularly. We like to test them and give them some longevity. If you've carried out your audience research, you may know what they want or need from your podcast. A standard podcast setup could be episode number, intro audio, a welcome, hello, this is what we're doing. The setup, this is the bit that tells people what's coming up. The main body of the podcast, a small feature maybe like the top tips that I do, and then the feedback from the listener, a call to action, next week, end sequence. Done. That's a basic outline of a podcast. And we'll include this in the show notes, by the way, as well. Let's move on to part 2 of the advice around your format and what you say and how you say it. Now, there's lots more to say about this side of things just before I go into it. So we've only got enough time because this podcast is just over 10 minutes each time.
Learn the secrets of the radio industry.
Radio skills for podcasters.
At the start of this podcast, I said there's something that you're doing or not doing that does you a disservice as a podcaster. Do you know what that is? It links to format. It's not selling your podcast. Right at the start of your podcast, not inviting me to the party. That's a big no-no. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts recently where the intro sequence really doesn't sell the podcast. As a listener, I need you to invite me to stay, to keep listening. You need to give me an invitation. Give me a tease for what's coming up. I heard one the other day that just simply said, we're doing our main feature, some advice of the week, and then didn't tell me anything else, but asked me to keep listening. Why would I keep listening? I don't know what your main feature or your advice of the week is. Tell me. They even forgot to give me anything about their call to action, which I only found out by listening through to the end of the podcast. Now, I listened out of professional curiosity. I'm doing this, radio skills for podcasters. I want to know what they were doing. But other listeners aren't as forgiving as me. Always promote. Invite the listener, especially the setup. Tease what you'll be doing right at the start of your podcast. Give me a bit of info about what you're doing. And also try where possible to promote the reason I should keep listening throughout your podcast. It's called flow. It's called progression. Radio is all about progression. So is speech podcast. Keep people listening. And I'll give you an example of a tease. This is completely different to podcast though. This is for a commercial radio presenter in a training session for his radio station, which has female listeners. So it went something like this. XYZ FM, Kevin here, and playing that song that gets you up on the floor. You know the one where you sing at the top of your voice as if sharing the pain of the world through the lyrics. Yeah, hey, you can sing all over again in the next few minutes right here on XYZ FM because we're playing that song next. Now, the presenter could easily have said, hi, it's XYZ FM, Kevin here. Now we're playing Gloria Gaynor next with I Will Survive. Keep it right here at XYZ FM. That's boring. There's no creativity around it. We want creativity to keep people listening. So think about creativity with your startup sequence when you put together your podcast format. And remember, each week, keep it the same, but different.
This is
Radio Skills for Podcasters.
Radio Skills for Podcasters.
With Kevin Field.
It's time for our top tip of the week. This week, I look at one simple thing you can do to remove clutter, which is your enemy, by the way, in your podcast. Now, you may have heard this used before. It's a very simple one. You may have used this in the workplace. It's a very simple one. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't clutter your offering, especially if you're an information podcast. Too many thoughts in one podcast, too many features, too many guests, and so on, and too many different subjects. It's just going to clutter it and confuse the listener. So try to, where you can, apply KISS, keep it simple, stupid, to your podcast. Right, now time to talk about how you can get in touch with us here at Radio Skills for Podcasters. So on Twitter, at radio_skills. Really easy, get in touch with us that way. Via our Facebook page, Radio Skills for Podcasters. On Facebook, just do the search, you'll find it. And you can email skills@radioskillsforpodcasters.com. So here's the thing. I'm hoping your feedback will be the lifeblood of this podcast. You will tell me what you want from me. I am an expert in the radio industry. I've won major awards with the stations I work with and the stations I've managed, and as a producer myself. So use me. Get in touch.
Next time
with Radio Skills for Podcasters,
we'll be looking at the tricks of the trade for interview skills. I'll tell you a winning trick that'll get more out of your interviewees and the basics to brush up on. See you next time.
Find us on Facebook, Google+, Radio Skills for Podcasters,
@radio_skills on Twitter.
Thanks for listening.
www.radioskillsforpodcasters.com.